Hello, everyone. I'm Eyja Brynjarsdottir at the University of Iceland, and I'm going to be looking at consumers as interactive kinds. More specifically, I'll consider how both group membership and individual self-image as expressed through consumer choices fit into the notion of interactive kinds. And I'm going to be discussing some types of consumer choices made in affluent societies and consider the role of self-perception and self-expression in such choices, among other things through our beliefs and values. And then I'm going to go on to show how a looping effect is in play. Now, we consume things for various reasons, obviously, perhaps. Some obvious reasons would be necessity and pleasure. Now, back in 1899, the American economist and sociologist Thorstein Veblen introduced a term that he called conspicuous consumption in his influential book, The Theory of the Leisure Class. Veblen claimed that there was a certain type of spending that people used to prove their high social status or class. And they would show their affluence through the purchase of luxury items or services. One version of conspicuous consumption has been called keeping up with the Joneses. And this is an idiom originating in a comic strip with that name that ran in various American newspapers between 1913 and 1938. People may want to show that they are affluent enough to afford nice things that others can't afford, indicating that they're better than others or have higher status. The less ambitious version perhaps involves not proving that one is better than others, but proving that one is just as good as the others, that one's status is not lower than that of one's neighbors. And this can be motivated, of course, by vanity, but there may be more practical reasons. Sometimes showing status is necessary if one wants to be taken seriously and not be excluded from various opportunities. Keeping up may also involve self-perception, where self-confidence and positive self-image are tied to perception of one's own social status. Food and clothing choices can be used for self-expression. Do I wish others to see me choosing healthy food or making refined choices at a fancy restaurant? And what about self-perception? For instance, if I think of myself as a sophisticated wine connoisseur, I may always stick to carefully selected expensive wines, regardless of whether I'm being watched by anyone else. Now, clothing and other aspects of appearance, such as jewelry, makeup, haircuts, can of course have various kinds of significance. When I buy my clothes, my individual tastes, values, and beliefs are going to play a role, but also my social position, including gender, profession, nationality, and place in the social hierarchy. And these are all factors that shape my self-image or self-identity and have an effect on my modes of self-expression. Decisions about what to eat can be based on various factors. We may like to eat food that tastes good. Health is a consideration as well. There's a range of approaches reflecting people's values and their approaches to health, convenience, and pleasure. And those are all strongly influenced by how those in question view themselves and their relation to the world. To what extent does the person in question prioritize health over what tastes good? And how is that affected by their various beliefs and values? Some other factors include convenience versus enjoying making one's own meals, how much time the person has on their hands, and so forth. And now, then there are values held in connection with food. that may cause some people to choose the local produce, abstain from factory farmed meat, abstain from meat altogether or even all animal products. And then there are religious beliefs involving food choices, environmental concerns affecting food choices, and so forth. And many have pointed out that affluence can be a determining factor in this, that those who are financially underprivileged may not have the opportunity to make these choices that can be more costly than, for instance, buying mass-produced factory-farmed food. And while this aspect of financial inequality, of course, requires our attention, my focus here and now is more on the choices of those who are in a position to make choices in the first place in this regard. Now, we make assumptions about what people are like and what their values are on the basis of their choice of clothing. Certain types of clothing are often associated with different professions and occasions, and deviating from those norms can be considered unprofessional or inappropriate. Dressing like a lawyer and dressing like a farmer, for example, call forth very different images. And wearing no or very little clothing is often frowned upon, unless people are sunbathing at the beach, and wearing office attire while competing in a sporting event would be considered highly odd. Now, even within this framework, we often have various choices that are expected to reflect our own identity and values. Gender is an obvious factor. What is considered appropriate attire, whether it's at the office, at a gala event, or at the beach, differs depending on our gender. Now, expensive clothing and jewelry can be worn in order to show a high social status, but this can get more complex. In some circles, status is expressed through not bothering with the clothing that could be considered to signify wealth, because that's the ultimate proof of not having anything to prove. An example of this can be found in the TV series Orphan Black in an episode called Human Raw Material. There are these two characters, Donnie and Cosima, who are about to go spying in a high-end fertility clinic. And Donnie has to be convincing while impersonating a super wealthy man called Douglas. And here we can see Donnie and Cosima getting ready.
So, why can't Douglas wear a suit?
Because if you can afford Brightborn, you're beyond suits.
Beyond Armani?
Trust me, I know these people. I grew up in Northern California. It's like the epicenter of obscene wealth and technological intervention. Douglas is a high net worth individual who's pining for a baby.
Whoa, hey, I know Douglas. I already played him with Felix. You can't come in and just change my character.
Okay, sorry.
Douglas is chill. He's a chill dude, okay?
Totally.
I'm gay, but I'm not, like, super gay, so maybe don't play the lesbian angle too much.
I'm just gonna let that one slide.
Wow, I look like a geriatric skateboarder.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Well, Donnie's character, Douglas, has to appear so secure about his upper class membership that he has no need to show that he belongs in that class. And while the regular criteria for expressing high status might involve something like a suit, Douglas is supposed to have so much money that he has no use for these criteria. He leaves no room for doubt about his class membership by looking any which way he wants. And this shows how we're often so acutely aware of how clothing choices or other consumer choices reflect who we are or how we are, including social class membership, that we can even manipulate these connections in various ways and pick up on various subtle cues surrounding them. Various other consumer products play a role in self-expression. We fill our homes and other surroundings with various objects. ranging from wallpaper and furniture to various knickknacks with decorative purposes. We buy books, movies, other forms of stimulation and entertainment, tickets for various kinds of sporting events, cultural events, cars, boats, bicycles, vacation cottages, trips to distant places, and so on. And of course, these purchases are going to be influenced by a great number of factors, including how much money we have. But our choices and prioritization will also be influenced by how we perceive ourselves and our place in the world, and how we wish to be perceived by others. And we're expressing something that's a part of who we are, our values and priorities. The self itself has even become a consumer product. We're encouraged to look for our true selves that may consist in how we would most like to be. Such true selves are often presented as detached from the mundanities of our real lives. The answer to the question, if you had the freedom to do anything you liked and the power to make the world exactly as you preferred, what would you do and how would you be? But the way we develop as individuals is constrained by a number of things, be they material, social, or personal. And it's that constrained version of the self that is perhaps best expressed in our consumption choices. While we may feel that we're freely expressing ourselves and our values through our consumer choices, several forces are actually affecting us. And I'm going to talk about two examples that are especially relevant for our self-expression and self-perception. The first is the so-called underdog effect. We tend to feel inspired by so-called underdog narratives that describe humble origins and even hardships that someone rose above with their diligence, talent, and hard work. I'm sure you've all seen this, a pamphlet or on the back of a carton, we get to read about how the founders started their business in a corner of their living room, their garage, or on a tiny farm. And those narratives can be very effective marketing tools for several reasons. And one of them is that many of us have a tendency to identify as underdogs ourselves. We can often relate underdog narratives to our own lives, and they may even be a part of group identities. We identify with David, but not with Goliath. And the second one is authenticity. And this is a somewhat related phenomenon to the underdog effect. It's an appeal to authenticity. We like to buy the real thing, and a small scale production is often considered more likely than mass production to yield authentic objects. Now, the term authenticity has many different uses, but they all tend to have a positive connotation. And this is discussed in a paper by Newman and Smith called Kinds of Authenticity that provides an overview of the different uses and categorizations of this term. And two of the types mentioned there are historical authenticity that concerns the origin story of the object in question, such as when we speak of an authentic Da Vinci painting or an authentic diamond. What matters in this case is the causal process or history of how the object came to be. Now, categorical authenticity concerns the type of object as whether it's consistent with a certain type of culture, for example. And this can be the case with food, as when we speak of authentic Mexican food. And what makes it authentic is not where it was made or by whom, but that it was made in accordance with certain rules that are informed by a certain cultural knowledge. And these two types of authenticity are often highly valued in consumer products, such that people will pay a higher price for authentic things than unauthentic, and like to be seen as using products that reflect their own authenticity. And there we have a third use of the term authenticity. Yet another aspect of consumer behavior is what's been called ethical consumption. And obvious examples can be found in food consumption, such as vegetarianism and veganism, or when people prefer locally grown produce or organic produce. And many consumers are concerned about various mass-produced products, potentially made by children or others laboring under inhumane conditions. Now, more recently, people, of course, have become increasingly concerned about the environmental impact of our purchases. And this can affect the choice of consumption items, such as consumers preferring items made of organic materials that are more friendly to the environment. It has also yielded a certain type of minimalism, so that people have been encouraged to buy fewer, more carefully chosen items. But someone who's making such choices may then not only be expressing their moral values, but also a certain financial status. And furthermore, research has shown that consumers who make choices on the basis of the concerns described, so-called ethical consumers, tend to be people with a high level of cultural capital. And this may reflect education, good access to information, but choices are also affected by others in our social group. In certain social groups, the pressure to make ethically informed consumer choices becomes stronger than in others. Now, our self-image will be shaped by our surroundings, the groups we identify with, our status within those groups, values endorsed by others in our lives, our life experiences, and so on. And many of us have a strong need to feel that we're expressing this image of ours, and this need can be manipulated through marketing and advertising. And a very effective way to get us to buy a particular product is to convince us that this is the very choice that we really want, and that it reflects our individuality and uniqueness. And so we can be manipulated into considering a certain product as just what we need for our self-expression or to prove our status. This item is just what I need in order to show my true self. I've described various ways in which our consumer behavior becomes a representation of our self-image, as well as membership in a social group or groups. And we construct and shape ourselves via our consumer choices, among other things, frequently trying to express our status, uniqueness, and authenticity. The effects go in the other direction as well. We're perceived and received as consumers in various ways, and we affect our surroundings through our consumer choices. These changes will affect our behavior and self-perception, which we again try to express through our consumer choices. And my claim here is that this is a case of looping. And while we may not have scientific terms for all the different types of consumers, we have various concepts representing them that can qualify as classification and be involved in classificatory practices. And furthermore, membership in various social groups is often inferred or established through consumer behavior, and awareness of group classification affects and alters consumer behavior. Now, consumer behavior is a factor in the interaction between classification and self-image on the one hand, and the state of things in the outer world on the other, which includes how various social groups are viewed by others, how members of the group view themselves, both on a group level and as individuals, and how conditions for consumer behavior are, such as the availability of products, the marketing of various products, and promoted values. The reactions to classification in the case of consumer behavior can both be affirming or it can involve attempts to defy it, as with the various other cases of interactive kinds. An individual's experience of outside reactions to them and their behavior is often on an individual level. We feel like the outside world is reacting to us as individuals rather than as a reaction to a specific type. And this is by no means exclusive to consumer-related behavior. To a certain extent, we all tend to be self-centered and self-focused to a certain irrational extent, and we process things as something to do with us individually when there actually are classificatory practices involved. And I think this indicates that we may need to look more closely at the role of self-image and self-expression under various circumstances where there is a feedback loop, not only in the consumer case.